It's not what do you want to be, it's how do you want to live. You get to decide like, oh, I want to scratch this itch, or I want to enjoy this piece of that, or I want to explore that a little bit more. You should do those kind of things, and that makes for a rich life.
Hey there, and welcome to Work is Third. I'm your host, Dawn Hunter, and I'm so glad you're here. Have you ever looked around at your life, your work, your routines, or the path you've built and quietly wondered, is this it? Is this how I want to live? In this episode, I'm talking with coach and therapist Calvalyn about what happens when we stop living by the shoulds and start getting curious about what we actually want. We explore everything from external validation and career pivots to values, naps, and the powerful reminder that you are never stuck. Let's listen in. Hello, Calvalyn, and welcome to Work is Third.
Hello, Dawn. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm really grateful that we're connecting today. It's a good day. We were just catching up a little bit on what that looks like, but I actually would like to start off by asking you to share the thing I ask all guests to share, which is a word to describe how you're doing today.
Today I think I am proud. My daughter is getting ready to move tomorrow. She is doing a working visa. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but she's going to be in New Zealand. So I'm just very proud of her for kind of doing something courageous. And so I'm feeling very proud today.
That's a great word and a great reason to feel proud. Has she been to New Zealand before or traveled abroad?
She has not. She's doing something I've never done and nobody in our family has ever done. And yeah, so no one has been to New Zealand. I'm sure I will be, but I haven't yet. No.
It's always great to be the first in your family to do something that no one else in your family has done. It's really, even if it's just, a new travel experience or moving to a new state. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
How long is her work visa for?
It can go up to 2 years, but she's already kind of looked at like other places that have a similar program. So she's like, I don't know if I'll stay there the whole 2 years or what I'll do. And I'm like, I want to be young and free and just doing life. It's just like a very good, probably a really good example for the listeners is like she's making a choice to do something, just going where the wind may go. She's got money saved up and she's got an opportunity to work. So she'll just see what happens.
I love that. Young and free and just going where the opportunity is. If only we could hold on to that as we age.
Yes, absolutely. That is the kicker. But I think sometimes we get glimpses of it, like we don't always, like there's seasons, so that you might be in a season where there's less freedom. And then other times there can be a season where there's more. So I try to think of it that way.
I like that. And I think you could describe your work as a way for people to find that freedom as they get older, right? I mean, you are helping therapists to build their own practice.
Absolutely. And that's a great example. Yeah.
Yeah. And having that financial freedom to be able to decide to take time off or go on a sabbatical or do whatever it might be, like giving yourself the financial freedom to make those choices.
100%. That's a very good, it's definitely part of why I do what I do. But I think it's one of the things that sometimes people don't recognize is actually a big part of what they're looking for. So people say things like, I want freedom and flexibility, but they typically are thinking like, oh, I just want to have a flexible work schedule. But it's not just the schedule, it's where can you work from, or how can you work, or who do you get to work with? And that can look lots of different ways. So I think that's absolutely a good point.
Love that. Thinking about flexibility broadly. I think I always think of it, but to hear you say it out loud, I'm like, yes, of course. It's not just about your time. It's about who you spend it with, how you spend it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes when people are frustrated or they are not happy, they immediately think like, oh, I must need a different job. I'm like, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you need a different role in the current job that you have, or maybe you need to put more into the job. Maybe you need to put less into the job. There's so many different ways that it could go, but we have kind of, and I don't know that this is, I'll find out more about whether or not it's like this in other countries, but definitely in America, I think we have a very dichotomous kind of process where it's like work life, home life. And if something's wrong, you think it's either home or it's work, but it could be a little bit of both or neither one. It could be all kinds of things. So I think that's why I really was kind of drawn to the podcast, because you are clearly talking about like, there's lots of things to do, but work should probably be third in that process, so that you can always have the happiness and the joy that you really want.
And I think having that happiness and joy comes from understanding your values and your interests, because then you can do what you were just describing, which is if you have a problem and you think it's your job, you can explore that more deeply if you know yourself better, because then you can say, is the work misaligned? Are the people I work with misaligned? Or, is the organization misaligned? And then you can make decisions from there. But it starts with really understanding yourself and what it is that you want and need in this season of your life, as you were saying.
Absolutely. And I don't think we give enough credence to that, even though we might have like solid core values that are kind of the same throughout our lifetime, the person you are is constantly evolving, that. And so you might be in a season of life where it's like, this really is the most important thing for me right now. And you get to a different season of life and that is not at all important. And that was your priority. And now you feel sort of out of sorts. So it's not at all uncommon for people to reach a stage of life, especially when they are, very experienced, very seasoned. They have, put in the work, they've built a career, they've built a reputation, to look around and think like, is this it? is this all it's supposed to be? And I think it's because you're in that quest of like, achievement versus experiencing and being and exploring, and all of that is part of life. Like, it really is.
Listen, you are describing my life, but 2 years ago, before I started my company, I mean, it was just this constant cycle of achievement and doing and thinking, how do I get to the next big step, or how do I make the next big progression in my career? But that's not always the path that you have to choose. You can choose to have a completely different career. You can choose to not work. And I think young people especially are great at this, about saying, I'm going to take 6 months off and go explore somewhere.
Yeah.
Why do we struggle in your work? Why do you think we struggle with wrapping our identity around these things that we're doing and then have a hard time letting them go?
So I had a training yesterday with some therapists in my community, and one of the things that came out of this training, and I don't know that I've ever said it this way before, but it was just like, yeah, that's it. For people that I'm working with, we have CEUs. So to maintain your license, you have to do continuing education every so many years, and you've got to have a certain quality of them. And so it puts you in this constant quest for a certificate, a constant quest for somebody outside of you to say, oh, yep, you did a good job. Oh, yeah, you got what you needed. Oh, yeah, you learned that really well. Oh, yeah, you passed the test. And so you get into this habit of waiting for this external validation of your life all the times. And the person I was talking to, she's like, I don't think I want to be a learner anymore. I think I just want to be and do and have. And I don't want to feel like, she's got to maintain her license, obviously, but it's like, I don't want to feel like that's my quest. She said, I have been thinking about whether or not I was going to learn another modality, or whether or not I was going to actually go through some coaching and kind of figure out what's next. And I'm so glad that I didn't invest in another modality, because I don't need to learn something else. I just need to be. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's the thing. But it's very easy when, and a lot of the people that I work with are very much rule followers, box checkers, do the right thing. We were the kid that the teacher left in the classroom to monitor the classroom when she went to the office, So we do that organically, and you reach a stage of life where you're like, but wait a minute, do I have a permanent record? Do I get to do what I want to do? Like, how does that work? And so I think finding that space is the goal, but we don't always get the message that that's the goal.
I'm really just my mind is blown about this idea around CEUs, because I have to maintain them for 3 certificates that I hold, right? Or 3 professions that I hold in practice. And I never thought of it that way, where you're constantly in the state of having to have some external validation of your work. And it drives us to continue to do the things that we were trained to do when we were younger, which is complete the assignment, get the approval, tell everyone that you got the approval, and it's really interesting to reframe that and say, I don't need to learn more or do more. I just need to be able to be and exist and do the thing that I'm already prepared and ready to do, and I'm out here doing anyways.
Absolutely. And I mean, and it's not like, I don't think we have to have an all or nothing thing. Like, maybe you do want to learn a new credential. Maybe you do want to learn a new technique. Sure, that would be great. But the idea that you have to do that in order to feel good enough, I think that's where we get into a slippery slope.
True. So I actually want to go back and start with you. I want to start with how you arrived at where you are. So you're helping other women to be the CEO of their life, as you say on your website. And how did you become the CEO of your life?
Ooh, now that would I don't know if we have enough time on the podcast for that, but because I definitely would say it was a scenic journey, right? So I very much followed a lot of like I would follow the path and then I would kind of veer off. And I'd follow the path and I kind of veer off. And I don't feel bad about the scenic route that I took because I definitely feel like all the things that I went through, learned, experienced, they definitely brought me to this moment and to be and the most prepared version of me in this moment. But ultimately, when I left high school as a teen mom at 17, I graduated and went off to college. I was like, I'm going to be a psychologist so that I can tell people what to do with their lives. Now, not only is that not what a psychologist does, I didn't know what psychologists really did. So I don't know where I came up with that idea, but I was 17. Hey. But I went lots of different twists and turns and spent a lot of time just doing what I thought I was supposed to do. I spent a lot of time in what I call the shoulds. Like, I should do this. I should go here. I should get this job. I should, And I got to the place where after about 15, 18 years in marriage, when I was realizing this was probably not going to be the relationship that was going to take me the distance, I did not want to live a life that felt like I was settling. I wanted to live a life that come whatever may come, that I felt good about the choices I was making and I felt proud about the choices that I was making. And I realized that I was looking at my marriage and I couldn't say that I was proud of my marriage because I wasn't living in alignment with my values. It wasn't healthy for lots of different reasons. And I couldn't justify to my kids staying in an unhealthy marriage. Like I couldn't justify that. So I started making the choices so that I was proud of what I had, whether it was a lot or a little. And that actually got me to here where I now own my own business and I help other people building their businesses. And what I'm probably most proud of is that I get to do things in a way that feels very authentic to me. So yes, I know lots of things. I have lots of skills, but I don't spend any time or energy trying to make people feel guilty or embarrassed or ashamed or disappointed in themselves for what they have done. Because that's one of the things that happens sometimes when people come to me. It's like, oh my God, my business is such a mess. I don't even want somebody to see it, And I'm like, it's okay. Can't be any worse than mine was when I first started. So let's get into this. But I think that's one of those things that sometimes happens is you are not the CEO of your life and you almost feel like embarrassed about it. So you don't get the help that you need to be that. So it just starts with one choice, basically, like one choice, one decision that this can be what I want it to be. And I'm just going to take one step at a time. As I get closer to it, it'll, kind of work itself out.
Appreciate hearing your story. And I'm curious of what some of those signs for you were of settling. What tensions were there for you that you had to resolve?
I have a super specific example. I was having a conversation and it was at my church at the time. And they were, they were saying, we need a new leader of children's church. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. But my initial thought was, what would my husband do if that was what I decided to do? Like, would he be okay with that? Or how would it look to people? Because he at the time didn't go to church with me. Right. And I thought, should I be making my decision based upon other people's opinions? Or should I be making my decision based upon what I actually believe? Like, does God want me to do this? Do I want to do this? And the fact that I was having that thought process was like this, do I do this other places? Which usually you do. Like if you do it in one place, you do it in other places. And I wouldn't have thought of myself as being that kind of person that made my decisions based upon other people's feelings or beliefs. But it was so ingrained. I think it can be so like, you don't really know, right? You don't know your own voice because it's so conditioned into you that you think like, well, I think I want to do this. No, I don't want to spend 20 hours a week volunteering on the soccer field. Who wants that? Like you just think it's the thing that you want to do. So that was probably the first like indication that something's not right here. And obviously I fully believe in therapy, but I also believe in coaching, right? Like traditional coaching, the kind where you have somebody who's certified and they actually have, skills to help you push through and get really curious about things. Being curious about your own thoughts is like the most powerful tool you can ever use. It's like, where did that thought come from? Whose voice is that actually saying that? Like those kind of things, that's really probably where it started.
Well, I appreciate too the example that you shared because so many of us end up in long-term relationships where we start to factor in our partners into our decisions. And we start to ask that exact question, which is, if I chose to do this, what would my partner think? And I find myself doing that sometimes. Like I want to take a trip and it might be a women's retreat somewhere. And then I'm like, oh, if I decide to do this, what will my partner think? Right. I kind of have to take a step back and say, well, is it what I want to do?
Right, right. I don't think there's anything wrong with getting other people's opinions, right? Like, I absolutely think if you're in a partnership and it's a healthy partnership, that you should absolutely consider the other person, like what's going on in their lives. Is now the right time? All those different things. But I think women, by for the majority, and I'm not going to say all women, but I think a lot of women default to what does somebody else want, and you end up living this life that is not really your life. It's like the life that other people decided for you. And to be fair, sometimes they're not even trying to live it for you. It's just the way that we're conditioned to believe. Like we're just kind of giving that power over, like almost subconsciously. We don't even know that we're doing it. So being just really intentional, that is a big part of this process, I think.
When you have therapists who come to you who are ready to get their business to the next level, they're probably encountering these issues that you're describing too, which is maybe they're questioning their worth, maybe they don't think they have the systems, maybe they are leaving a relationship or an environment that wasn't as supportive. What's one of the first things that you have your clients do to help get them on that path to where they can start to liberate themselves from some of those stories about how they're supposed to behave?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that most of my clients need is to own the identity of CEO. And this is something that I did not, 11 years ago when I started my business, I wouldn't have called myself a CEO. I said I was a business owner. I said I was an entrepreneur. I said I was a coach. I said all these things. But we have this version of CEO that we think is, some older white man in a gray suit. That's the vision of it that we have. So I challenge them to see themselves as a CEO and to really decide what they are as a CEO. Because truly, you get to decide. You can be like I know that they're under some trouble right now, or they're going through things right now. But like, you could be the CEO of Ben and Jerry's, right? Like, you're the kind of person that says we are, we have our values and we live our values and we create. Like, you could be that kind of CEO, and you could be wearing a tie-dye shirt and doing whatever, and you're still a CEO. Or you can be someone sitting in a boardroom and not caring about your customers and just trying to protect your shareholders. So you get to say, I am a CEO, and what does it look like for me to be the kind of CEO that I want to be? That is like, for most people, they're like, huh, what does that look like for me? Okay, well, I want to be the kind of CEO that pays my employees well, that treats my clients well, that earns a good living, that's, doesn't feel like my business is taking over my life. Okay, good. Now let's go with that. And that gives us usually some direction of where to go to actually start to put the plans in place. And there's some systems that people typically need to have put in place, but ultimately it starts with you really identifying as the person who owns this business and gets to decide what happens. Because most of the time what happens when therapists get into the role of owning a private practice or running a private practice is they just run what they think they're supposed to run. They just do it the way they think they're supposed to do it. I'm like, you get to be the supposed to. You get to decide what that is. And maybe that means that you're billing insurance. Maybe it means that you have a concierge client list and you've only got 40 people that you work with a year. I mean, you get to decide what that looks like. And for most people, that's both scary and exciting. And so then we kind of sit with that.
You remind me of if you have people who come in who need assistance, who are struggling with the idea of wanting to expand, to have employees and have like a big practice, right? And like build it and eventually, maybe expand, have multiple offices of whatever. Or people who say, no, my CEO life is just me, and maybe an assistant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's perfectly fine. For some people, the idea of they want more money, so they think it has to be bigger. And I'm like, not really. I mean, you can have a solopreneurship that is making you good money, just depends on how you're structured it. Like there's a lot of different ways to structure it. And, are you selling things? Are you doing speaking engagements? Are you creating curriculums for other people and licensing them? There's all different kinds of ways that you can do that. The key here is, what do you want it to look like? And it's okay if that changes over time. I think that is a huge thing when it comes to choosing a life that you really want to live. You get to make choices and you can change those choices, and you're not like stuck. A lot of people think, "Oh, I'm too far gone, or I'm too old, or it's too late." No, none of those things are true. If you still got breath in your body, you still have an opportunity to make the choices that you want to make. Even if it's not exactly how you wanted it to be. Maybe you're not going to be the president of the United States at 77 years old. Maybe that's not going to be your story, but you can have the version of it that you want. Like you can still have a impact on the community and impact on the way we govern and live. Like there's lots of different ways to do that.
Did the Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And one of the exercises in that book is to make a list of like 20 profession. Well, actually, I think you start out with 5 and then like you periodically just add 5 more and 5 more of things you could have done, right? That you would have been interested in doing. And then you're challenged to pick one and do something adjacent to that. So if you say you wanted to be a librarian, for example, do go spend a day at the library.
Yeah.
Or if you say you wanted to run a coffee shop, maybe you have a meeting with someone about how they set up their coffee shop business. And so it's a way to help you start to identify all these other aspects of your identity that you could have done, could have monetized should you have chosen. But even not, how you can still do some things that call to you and call to who you are that will bring you joy, even if they ultimately aren't what you end up doing. You may not be president, but could you still have a leadership role in your community?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have an aunt that is, I don't know her. I don't want. First of all, I'm not going to say her age. she's over 60, but she became a councilwoman in her 70s. Like and I don't know that she had this dream to be a councilwoman, and and it's obviously a very small town, but she said somebody wanted her to run. She ran. She got it, and I'm like, what? And she was not anything political or social service or anything like that her entire life. So to be in that role, I think it's both hilarious to me that she ended up there, but also inspiring, because you're never too old to do what you want to do or to do something new, right? Like this is your one and only life that you get to live in this way. So make the most of it.
Make the most of it. If you wake up one day and you no longer really want to be doing the job that you're doing, it's okay to say, I don't want to do this anymore, and start to explore what other options are out there for you.
If there's one thing that I have definitely done, I have pivoted through various careers. When I initially went to college, I decided I was going to be a psychologist, left after a year and got married, and went and became a cosmetologist. And I worked as a cosmetologist for 6-ish years and put myself through x-ray school, became an x-ray tech. And I worked like that. I did mammos, I did urgent cares, I did all the things. And I left there after 6 years. Each time I left, I added another child. So I'm raising kids the whole time, right? And with my 4th daughter, I said, I want to stay home. I don't know what I'm going to have to do. I might have to have 7 part-time jobs, but I want to be home enough to be present with my kids. And I did that, finished grad school, and that's how I ended up back full circle into the mental health space. And every single place that I ended up contributes to what I'm able to do now, like who I am and what I'm able to see and the perspective that I have right now. So when I have a conversation with people now, all of that, experience comes into the room with me. But being able to reinvent myself, like anytime, like to me, it's just like, it's a no-brainer. Absolutely. You're never stuck. And that's not to say that it's always easy either. I don't want to give people the mistaken impression that it's like, oh, it's easy, just do it. No, there will be challenges. And what I'm saying is it'll be worth it. It's 100% worth it.
I really love your journey. It matches my own in so many ways. I started out, I was an English major. I was really drawn to working with at-risk youth. My first career, I will call it, was working with at-risk youth. I worked in foster care system. I worked in child protective services, went back to school, got a science degree, worked as a research assistant, a microbiologist for 7 years almost. Then went to law school and got my master's in public health, worked in a health department. And then most recently, 2 years ago, I decided to start my own company. And I'm not doing the things that probably between law school and 2 years ago, I was working in public health law and policy. And one of the challenges that I faced was people saying, well, what are you going to do next? Where are you going to land? Let us know. Right. And for me, I was just saying, I don't know at first. And then it turned into a longer, I don't know, but not that. Right. I don't know, but I'm not going back to that. And I think that was surprising to people, but it also forced me to question my choices too. And sometimes that was healthy. And sometimes it was, I've got to drown this out because I know that what I'm doing is the healthiest thing for me. But then you would hear people talking and, I would get these messages and it would make me think, did I do the right thing? But you're the one who gets to determine what is the right thing.
Sometimes that process of elimination is amazing. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not that. Is exactly what I think it should be, right? Like, I don't know what it is yet, but I know that ain't it. I think that's exactly where we should kind of start because this idea, I mean, and at one point I was a school counselor and I absolutely, we started in kindergarten. It's super cute, right? We've got the kids. What do you want to be when you grow up? And we put all the things on there. But what I tell my kids now, and I'm on my last one that's home, so I've got one more to get through high school. It's not what do you want to be, it's how do you want to live, right? Do you want to get up early in the morning? Do you want to stay up late at night? Do you want to live in an area where you have all the seasons? Do you want to work at a job where you have to sit still? Like, it's not just what do you want to be, it's how do you want to live. I enjoyed every career that I had. Like, I enjoyed each one of them, but I left being a hairdresser because I didn't like my paycheck being dependent on whether or not somebody wanted highlights. Like I didn't enjoy not having that kind of control over my pay. And I loved working in the hospital, but I wanted a little bit more flexibility and I wanted to use different parts of my brain rather than just being able to do the x-rays that I was doing. So I wanted to do different parts of my brain. So like you get to decide like, oh, I want to scratch this itch or I want to enjoy this piece of that or I want to explore that a little bit more. You should do those kind of things. And that makes for a rich life, which I think is good for your mental health, your physical health, your relationships, your emotions, just all the things. So that is really, really, I think something we do a disservice to ourselves and each other, right? Which is, well, what are you going to do? Which is part of why I'm so proud of my daughter for going to New Zealand. Cause I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is going to look like, but she's exploring and she'll figure it out. And if she needs me, she'll call me. But this is what I want to cultivate. If I feel like I've done a good job if I've cultivated that into my children because I have all four of my girls are all five of my kids are girls. So if I can cultivate into 4 women in the world that you can chart your own path in a way that doesn't require you to be married if you don't want to, doesn't require you to have kids if you don't want to, but to be a good person in the world, then I've done my job here and I'm good to go.
This is advice that I feel we'd have to have a book of advice I wish somebody would have given me when I was in my 20s or even younger, which is really thinking about how do you want your life to look when you grow up. And one of the things that has come up on this show with other guests is this idea that, like for me, and I know for many other people, we get a job because we have to sustain our life, right? So we don't think about what is the best job for me or what's most aligned with my values or skills. We think, oh, I want to live on my own. I want to have an apartment and I need a car. And so in order to do those things, I need a job that will pay me enough money to do that. And we do the job or we find a job so that we can have these things, but we don't really think about if that's the life that we want to be living.
Right. And I think if we start having those kinds of conversations with kids earlier, like my 16-year-old is like, she's saying now, maybe I'll take a gap year. And I'm like, I would have never even dreamed of it. But, I'm like, well, you are absolutely welcome to take a gap year. However, just know that I'm not funding a gap year. If you want to take a gap year, you have to also plan for how am I going to be able to afford the things that I want to afford during that gap year. You can move to New York and be on, try to make it on Broadway. You can do all the things that you want to do. Just also be thinking about how to make that work. So there's and I don't know the person's name, but there's a person that I follow. They come up on my timeline on TikTok every now and again. And she works and then she saves up a bunch of money and then she's in her van just doing whatever she's doing. And then she works and she saves up a bunch of money and then she's in her van doing a bunch of things. And I think now she's building out like a jewelry business. So she will work. And I feel like she's maybe like a welder. She's some type of really industrial skilled professional, the kind that you can make really good money in a very short period of time. And then she just stashes it. And then she will take off for 5 or 6 months and she'll be driving around in that van, selling her jewelry out of the back of the van, and I'm like, that's a life. It wouldn't be the life I necessarily want, but it's a way to live. And I love that people are choosing that now, right? Like they're choosing, oh, I can do that. And then we get to the chance to see that because I do think it kind of expands your perception of what's actually possible. And it's not necessarily everybody doesn't have that straight linear line from I picked the perfect degree out of high school, got the perfect degree, passed, all the tests, and now I'm going to do this for the next 40 years. I don't see that being most people's journey at this point in life. And I like that.
Love that. I love that. And like you, I love to see the examples. And part of why I started this podcast was I really want to share stories of how people arrived at a point where they said, I'm going to do life on my own terms. And I'm going to do it in a way that feels aligned and healthy, and where I have this kind of balance without sacrificing, aspects of my identity. And I don't know. I mean, I hear the example of the woman like saving money and then living in her van. And I'm like, that sounds really interesting. I mean, it's complicated when you have a family, you have pets, you have a home, whatever. You have to figure those logistics out. But it's possible.
100% possible. And I mean, I probably wouldn't have thought that 20 years ago, but it's definitely possible. And I think what I think these types of conversations do is it gives you an idea to just kind of maybe that's not what you want. Like maybe the idea of living in a van is the last thing you could think of, but maybe for you, it's just choosing to live somewhere else a part of the year, or, choosing to move, with remote work to some other, maybe you give up your house entirely and you just decide you're going to move from place to place. There's somebody I follow from time to time that doesn't own a home, doesn't rent a home, just house sits. Now, I would not want that, but I think you probably see some amazing things just house sitting from place to place, and also get to be in some amazing spaces too. So just the richness that life can be, I think whatever you can do to get as much life out of life as you can is a good thing.
I hear these examples and I think one of the things I didn't feel like I had in childhood was a lot of stability, and people who grow up in perhaps traumatic environments, that's something that they deal with in adulthood, is needing control, needing stability. And I imagine that that's something that's more prevalent in a field where people are actually confronting these issues from childhood and how they function as adults. Anyways, like, do you see that where people have to kind of overcome these, maybe there's some childhood trauma, maybe there's some other life experiences that are holding them back, and they have to kind of identify and address those. And I'm curious too, because this is the field where you are helping people to navigate those also, but you may have to navigate those for yourself. What does that look like?
Absolutely. So one of the things that when I decided to get my coaching certification, I went through a trauma-informed coaching certification for exactly that reason. Because most of the time when people are struggling with getting to the next level of where they want to be in life, it's because they have an upper limit that has been created at some point in their life about how good it can be, how good life can be, how much money they can have, how much love they can experience, how much like accolades and praise they can get. Like there's a certain level, and once people get to that level, they're no longer comfortable. Like I know people, for example, that want to build their platform, but they're not comfortable being seen on camera. Well, unless you have lots and lots of money to pay for ads, you're going to have to find some way to show up and be seen. And if you don't feel comfortable being seen, that's probably about you not being comfortable being vulnerable, or not being comfortable being judged, or those kind of things. So a lot of times that stuck feeling is really your kind of upper limit being pushed against your potential. And that gap between like what you think is possible and what's actually possible can be huge if your experience was unsafe or even just inconsistent. Like sometimes we had good parents, but things were rough. So it came like the imprint of that is that money is not something that you can count on, or stability is not something that you're guaranteed. So you do take that safe route. And believe it or not, a lot of therapists find therapy and social work and psychology and all those different kind of categories because they had those experiences there themselves. And so they get into the field where they can kind of fulfill that mission that they didn't, like fulfill whatever they didn't get in childhood, but they end up getting like stuck and basically repeating it, which is the you know, like the part that can get really challenging. So we definitely bump up against it. The key for most people is identifying the pattern. If you start to identify the pattern, then you can interrupt the pattern. If you haven't identified it yet, then it's harder for you to be able to say, so like that safety thing about like, well, why am I drawn to this kind of job even though I hate it? Oh, that's because I want the safety of it, right? So once you identify that, you're like, okay, well, how can I have the safety without the thing that I don't hate? Or where else can I feel safe in a way, but not stuck, so to speak? And then you can start to put the things in place that make sense. So a lot of people don't want a traditional entrepreneur's life because it feels very inconsistent. So that's not something that they want. So maybe you don't ever want to be a full-time entrepreneur. That's okay too. Maybe you like working for someone else, but you still want to be able to have a little bit of that freedom over here to do some of the things that you want to do. That can work too. So you get to decide what that looks like, but you got to figure out what the pattern is so that you can interrupt it.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And of course, I am a big fan of therapy as well and have a therapist and have for many years. And even now, you encounter different things as you age and as your experiences expand. And you're constantly, I think, having to, I hope, learning about yourself and working on yourself. But those patterns, even when at least my experience is, you feel like you've addressed them, and then sometimes you'll be in a new situation and that old behavior or response pops up and you're like, oh wait, I've got to acknowledge this. What's happening here? And and then remember what you've learned about how to approach that pattern differently. But I think that can be challenging because I think there, maybe some people, and maybe I'm guilty of this, approach healing as you become healed, but you're always healing, I think.
You are always healing. And this I think goes back to my experience in kind of healthcare. When you think about a scar, a wound, something on the outside, we get to a place, oh, it's healed, okay, great, but the underneath there never stops healing. It never ends. The cells underneath that scar, that scab, those cells never, that's how scar tissue develops and all those kind of things. Because once something has been disrupted, it's always in the process of healing. So sometimes you have to go in there and make revisions. You might have to open it wide up and start all over. But there's something we talk about, kind of the spiral of healing. And so what happens sometimes, and this is very uncomfortable often, is you'll hit the same spot from a different level. So like you're going up the spiral, like if you think about a spiral staircase, you're going up the spiral, you'll hit the same spot, but you'll be hitting it from a different perspective. So it's kind of a similar problem, but you're like, why am I going through this again? It's because you're now hitting it from a different angle, from a different level. So yeah, maybe you had, let's say, for example, if you're, I remember minimum wage going from $5.15 up to $7.25, right? So if you're old enough to do that, you might be like, oh, I was comfortable at $30,000 a year, but now I'm making 50. Oh my gosh, I'm comfortable at $50,000 a year. Maybe I want to make 75. Could I really make 100? Could I make 150? One of the things that'll sometimes happen when people come in to like have a session with me is I'll say, okay, what do you want to be making? And they'll say things like, well, I'd like to make 100,000. And I'm like, you don't want to make $100,000. That's not the number you really want. And I know that that's not the number they really want, but they're scared to say the number they really want because it still feels too far. And that feeling of it being so far actually hurts a little bit. They're afraid to hope for what they actually could make because that feels like they're being greedy or they feel guilty about it. And all that usually comes from the stuff you got when you were a child, like being told the money doesn't grow on a tree and all that stuff, right? So all that stuff has to come up out of you. And you have to first recognize it and be aware of it. So then you can interrupt that pattern and then replace it with a healthy pattern that makes more sense. So yeah, it absolutely shows up and it'll keep showing up until you deal with it.
That's actually one of the other mindset shifts that I worked on. I know a lot of entrepreneurs need to work on. So you're not just embracing this identity of being a business owner, but you also have to embrace new stories about money. And I read The Financial Feminist by Tori Dunlap, and I like it because the whole book is an exercise in exploring your emotional attachment to money and the stories that you learned about wealth and abundance. And I had not, until I read that book and I was in my 40s,
really thought about it in that way, my relationship with money in that way. But you do have to say, what did I learn? I grew up in a household where money didn't grow on trees. And then you carry that into adulthood and it shapes your spending. It shapes your perception that money is limited or that your ability to have more is limited. And that's how you that's how you approach work or opportunity, is thinking there's a limit on you.
Right. Another one I think is super common and is and that I see with my clients, but I think is a common one, just even amongst the general population, is that in order for me to get it, somebody has to lose it. And so if you inherently feel like, people are going through hard times, and that's a big one that I'm kind of helping lots of clients through right now, which is as people are losing their jobs and people are getting laid off and their insurance rates have climbed through the roof. They don't have a lot of money. And so you're face to face with wanting to help people and still needing to pay your own bills. And how do those two things exist in a space without you feeling guilty? Especially when we have, therapists have an ethical code with, regardless of which, classification they're under. There's lots of ethical codes and guidelines about how we serve our clients and putting the client's needs first. And so for a lot of people, that is really a hard place to be. And if you don't deal with those stories, it will literally just crush your spirit, and it'll crush it. And that is why so many people in the mental health field and social services are literally constantly crushed by burnout and stress. But you have to identify the stories, and and I found, like, you get to a place where you're not angry about the story anymore. You don't blame anybody for the story. Your parents did what they needed to do, but you decide, like, they did what they needed to do. They tried, they were, doing their best. But here I get to make a new statement. But like with my kids, I stopped saying money doesn't grow on tree. My older two probably heard it a little bit. They really probably did. But my younger two, definitely, they get, that's not in the budget right now. Or I haven't put that in my budget for this month. And that's just the reality. So it's not about whether or not I have the money. It's about whether or not I put that in the budget. And that's a choice. And even just the energy of that is completely different than we can't afford it. Right? Because most of the time you could afford it. You're choosing not to afford it, and maybe for a very good reason. But I choose not to spend my money on that right now. Or what I've done with my kids, especially as I've gotten to teenage years, is that something you want to spend your money on? And if the answer is no, it's probably a good indication that you don't actually want it. Right? So if they say yes, sometimes I still will buy it. It's just, I want to see if you actually care enough about this to spend your money on it. If you do, then we'll have that conversation. But for the most part, I just want them to feel more comfortable with money and not have as many of those stories to go in adulthood as maybe I did growing up.
So let's talk more about you and what your CEO life looks like. What are the stories that you have about your life, and, like, what does your CEO life look and feel like for you?
So I am currently in this intensive business incubator, and it is already kind of challenging me a little bit because I joined this because I had some very specific goals for 2026 and wanting to expand my business. I feel like this is a really good time in the industry to expand the business. And it's starting to make me think about how I choose to limit myself from time to time. Right? Like, oh, this is, I'm doing a great job. I make a decent amount of money, but my vision actually is quite a bit bigger than the way that I currently operate. So, just thinking about how to expand in a way that maintains the kind of life that I want. I don't necessarily want to have 80 employees. That is not something that doesn't appeal to me. Right? So for many years, I've been 98%, like totally do I'm a jack of all trades, but this next season requires me to not do every single thing, and choosing the way to do that aligns with me and feels good, in my body. That is something that I'm literally navigating as we speak. I definitely know that I always want to have a job. Well, at least for right now, want to have a job that's location independent. I can very easily see myself deciding to work from someplace for the summer. And that's kind of how I live my life. But just allowing myself to think about how it can be and what it can look like. That's fun. As like, I think that I'm in the season of having fun as a CEO. Like, and to be honest, I feel like I make more money when I'm having fun. That is something that I'm figuring out, is how to have fun as a CEO. I'm gotten really, really good at putting systems in place to do work for me so that I get to do the stuff that I enjoy doing. So I'm a CEO that may never have 50 staff members, but I'll have a business that can help thousands.
That's such a good message. I think it's because for entrepreneurs, especially, you might think, and this goes back to earlier in our conversation, that you have to build and grow and have a bunch of staff and keep building, growing. But that growth can look different for everyone.
Yeah, the structure of my business is evolving. But I know like one of the things I was just kind of even working on earlier today is I will be referring some people to, like there's services I don't want to take on that I'm going to be like, hey, I'm just going to build out my referral network and I will have my list of preferred people that I refer to and maybe we'll collaborate in some way where it's a joint venture of some sort, but I don't have to do everything and I can still provide a really great service and my clients can be taken care of and I don't have to be the one to do all of it.
This is a perfect segue into the 4 questions I ask every guest because you talked about limit. And so I have a couple questions about boundaries. But the first question for you is, what is something that is easy for you to say yes to?
It's easy for me to say yes to a nap. It is really easy for me to say yes to a nap. You don't have to twist my leg, my arm. I'm like, if there's room for a nap, and I was like, sometimes I'm like, this nap was delicious. Like, I just love a good nap. Me and Michelle Obama, she says she likes to go to bed early and I take a nap. Yes. So I never turn down a nap.
Naps are my love language. So I get it.
Love a good nap. Love one.
Yeah, me too. Okay. So then what is something that's hard for you to say no to?
So it's probably hard for me to say no to a good cup of coffee. That's probably the one that's the hardest for me to say no to. And it's not even like, I don't even necessarily have caffeine in my coffee, but I like the ritual of something warm in a cup. It just feels comforting to me. So it's like, maybe that's just the ritual of it.
And do you feel like sometimes you don't need coffee and that's why you think you should say no, but you really just want the ritual? Or what is it that you're wrestling with?
There was a season where I stopped drinking caffeinated coffee. So I'll have like decaf. I know that I'm not getting caffeine from it. So it's not giving me a jolt of energy, but I just it feels like it's the ritual of the process. But so I don't know that I ever turn it down or feel like I have to turn it down, but I just know like most people are like, I got to have my caffeine. And I'm like, I'm not getting any caffeine and I still want my coffee.
Yeah. No, I like the ritual too of the cup. I mean, I'm drinking tea right now and it's just like, I just love having the warm beverage and something about it. So when it comes to how the ways that you take care of yourself, set boundaries, rest, take a nap, practice self-care, what do you do really well?
I say no really well. I think partially because I'm very clear on my values now. One of the therapists I was with probably right after my separation, she had me go through this values exercise, which I encourage everyone to do a values exercise every year or so. Anytime you feel unsettled, I would go through and do a values exercise because if you get clear on your values and you line up any decision you have to make to your values, the answer becomes crystal clear 90% of the time. The other time you might like 10% of the time you're like, ooh, it could go either way. But like the vast majority of the time, if you line up whatever decision you have to make against the values that you actually hold dear, and sometimes you're not clear because you might have other values like competing values, but if you line up what you're going to do against those values, it's pretty easy to say like, this is not in alignment with that value, so it's got to go. So if it doesn't align with my values, it's pretty easy for me to say no to it.
That's powerful. I hope we all get to that point one day. So then is there anywhere where you still struggle when it comes to rest or self-care or setting boundaries?
I'm getting better, but what's sometimes difficult is saying yes, like saying yes to those things that feel frivolous. For a long time, I struggled with saying yes to getting help, like yes to letting somebody support me. One of my coaches one time took me through an exercise where I had to receive help. That was the exercise for the week. Like I had to ask for and receive help. And it was so crazy because one of the things that came up during that week was, and it was funny to me because my brother-in-law like absolutely adores my children. And I could ask him any day of the week, could you pick up the kids? Could you grab this? I can't make it to soccer practice or whatever. But I would never have asked. Like I just wouldn't have asked for that. So I wanted to receive things, but I wasn't putting myself in position to receive them. So I had to say yes when someone offered me something, and I had to put myself in positions to receive things. And like anything, it's a practice. Like you have to build up that muscle, especially if you have been somebody who maybe wasn't taken care of in the past or where people didn't offer you things in the past. or where you were maybe guilted or embarrassed or ashamed about asking for things. Like that was my struggle. So I'm getting much better at that, just to get into the habit of saying yes.
That's something I think probably a lot of us struggle with, is doing it on our own. And especially if you maybe are an oldest child, maybe you
Mhm.
were parentified when you were younger, maybe you've always
Yes.
had to be the person who makes the decisions in your family. It is hard to ask for and accept help.
Yeah. But it's worth it because, I always think the person who's offering gets something out of me saying yes too. So if I never say yes, I'm limiting their value of getting the pleasure of like, oh, I was able to do that. So that I think makes the world a better place.
Beautiful way to frame it. I love that. They get something
Yeah.
out of it too. Hmm. Calvin, I have loved this conversation. I'm like, in some
Fun.
ways, talking to someone like myself. We have so many similar experiences.
Yeah, it was so much fun.
And one last question I have for you is, we have a companion playlist that I think of as like a list of just music that is your hype song. So I ask guests to contribute. What is something that you think of that just makes you feel good, feel happy, feel joyful, feel powerful? Any genre, any kind of song, what comes to mind for you?
That is so funny. So Ti has a new song out called "Let Him Know." It's probably his first song in maybe like a decade or something. But when that song came out, I sent it to my sister and my niece. We have a little group chat, and I was like, "This is my new song. Just in case anybody needs to know, this is a song I'm playing whenever I'm ready to, get to work, get to business, anything. This is my new song." My sister's like, "Okay, whatever." 3 days later, she's like, "Guys, this song is great." I'm like, "It is. It's just an amazing song. It feels like the '90s." And it's just hype music. So that song is the one I would contribute.
Okay, now I'm looking forward to adding that to the playlist and to letting listeners know we can link it to the show so they'll be able to listen to it if you listen on Spotify. Yeah, and I've really enjoyed having you here. I appreciate your time today. Any parting words for listeners?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me because this was totally fun and wonderful conversation. I love a good conversation. So this was wonderful. But my only parting words is just you get to live this life, choose how you live it.
So powerful and empowering. Calvalyn, thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much. I had a blast.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Calvalyn for this wonderful conversation. If this resonated with you, I'd love for you to take a moment to reflect. Where in your life are you living by someone else's expectations instead of your own? Remember, you are not stuck, and small choices matter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need this reminder too. And as always, work is third. Put yourself first.